Hello, my name is Lexi. I would like to continue um, study in the book of Daniel, specifically about the prophetic verses in it, and now we're in chapter 8. In the third year of the reign of Belteshazzar the king. By the way, if you remember the previous part, I mentioned that it's very important to know when actually the prophecy was made, and um, just quick reminders that the prophecy, like the third year, chapter 8, was made between uh, about so it's between about 561 to 538 BC before Christ, and it was still Babylonian Empire before the Persian Empire came to power. Verse 2. Oh, Daniel, subsequently to the one which appeared to me previously, I looked in the vision, and while I was looking, I was in the citadel of Susa, which in the province of Elam, and looked in the vision, and I myself was beside the Ulai canal. Then I raised my eyes and looked, and behold, a ram which had two horns was standing in front of the canal. Now the two horns were long, but one was long that the other. With the longer one came up. Uh, Last I saw the ram uh, uh, booting westward, northward, and southward, and no other beasts could stand against him, nor was there anyone to rescue from his power, but he did as he pleased and made himself great. While I was observing, behold, a male goat was coming from the west over the surface of the entire earth without touching the ground, and the goat had a prominent horn between his eyes. He came up to the ram that had the two horns which I had seen standing in front of the canal, and rushed at him in his mighty wrath. And I saw him coming up beside the ram, and he was enraged at him. And he struck the ram and smashed his two horns, and the ram had no strength to stand him. So he hurled him to the ground and trembled on him, and there was no one to rescue the ram from his power. Then the male goat made himself exceedingly great, but once he became powerful, the large horn was broken, and in his place four permanent horns came up toward the four winds of heaven. And most of the people just stop and start thinking about. But honestly, I would keep reading because um, the explanation is within that chapter. So verse 9, and out of one of them came a rather small horn, which grew exceedingly great towards the south, toward the east, and toward the beautiful land, Israel. It grew up the heavenly lights, and some of the lights, that is, some of the stars, it grew down to the earth, and it's trampled down. It's in, I would argue that's Antiochus fourth Epiphanis. If you don't know this guy, that's, let me see, this guy right there. You can search him on Wikipedia or just Google it. Epiphanis fourth. Antiochus the fourth Epiphanis. He lived between. By the way, Epiphanis means God manifest. If you studied ancient history after Alexander the Great, it's pretty crazy history, by the way. Um, it's like some sons would kill their fathers, fathers would kill their sons, so sons would have to marry their mother, or a brother would have to marry his sister. It was really crazy history if you have studied, um, but yeah, if you have time, check this out. That's pretty much, like I said previously. I believe there's nothing in the Book of Daniel talks about the second coming. I would argue it's about different historical events and specifically about the first coming of Christ, where Christ became flesh, lived a sinless life, died on the cross, and rose again from the dead. That's predominant, should be the focus, because once again, Book of Daniel is written about 500 years before Christ. So continue on. I would argue, Antiochus the fourth Epiphanes uh, even exalted itself to be equal with the commander of the armies. By the way, commander, probably Lord of Hosts. That's probably much better translation, but okay. And it removed the regular sacrifice from him, um, and the place of his sanctuary was overthrown. And because of an offense, the army will be given to the horn alone with the regular sacrifice, and it will hurl truth to the ground and do as it pleases and be successful. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to that particular one, who will speak? Who was speaking? How long will the vision about the regular sacrifice apply? Then, while the offense causes horror, so as to allow both the sanctuary and the army to be trembled. And he said to me, for 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the sanctuary will be properly restored. So I would argue that it's either have to be about rebuilding by Ezra and Nehemiah. If you read Book of Ezra and Nehemiah, Book of Ezra, that's where actually the temple was rebuilding. But the second time the temple was rebuilt was actually by Herod. Um, so so renovation. But interesting things that, in my opinion, honestly, at Maccabees the temple was destroyed. It was not just altar was destroyed, but the temple itself. And Herod the Great is the one who rebuilt it. So technically, you have the first temple by Solomon, second temple by Ezra and Nehemiah, and the third temple by the Herod the Great. So interesting thing, because honestly, like some people still trying to talk about the third temple, and I'm like, look, the temple does not even matter anymore. Christ says, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will build it again. In First Corinthians, Paul writes to the Corinthian Christians that their body is the living temple of God, and God does not dwell in a temple that made with hands. In Book of Acts, when he was preaching at Athens. So continue on. So in my opinion, it's either could be, and once again, the temple was not yet restored yet, but I think that was specifically about the temples that Ezra and Nehemiah that's where the temple was rebuilding. Um, Continue on. Verse 15. When I, Daniel, had seen the vision, I thought to understand it, and behold, standing before me was one who looked like a man, and I heard the voice of a man between the banks of Ulai, and he called out and said, Gabriel explained the vision to this man. So he came near to where I was standing, and when he was, I was frightened and fell on my face. And he said to me, Son of man, understand that the vision pertains to the time of the end. And I would argue this. What's the time of the end? And I would say it doesn't talk about the end of the world, but I think it's actually end of the old covenant. So that's why I'm kind of like still not sure is it the temple by Ezra and Nehemiah or by Herod. But the time of the end of what? End of the old covenant. But continue on, let's talk about verse 18. Continue reading. Now, while he was talking with me, I was dazed with my face to the ground, but he touched me and made me stand in my place. And he said, Behold, I am going to inform you of what will occur at the final period of indignation. And what's the final period of indignation? I don't know. I mean, because seems to me, honestly, it doesn't talk about the end of the world. Continue on, because it pertains to the appointed time of the end. End of what? And then all of a sudden he started talking about this. Verse 20. The ram which you saw with the two horns represents, by the way, end of what? End of maybe exile captivity of the Jews. As you remember, I showed you in the beginning, you have this 70-year captivity, which was prophesied by Jeremiah that Jews would go to captivity into Babylon. So, verse 20. The ram which you saw with the two horns represents the kings of Media and Persia. Notice they tell you which country, Media and Persia. It's kind of obvious it doesn't has nothing to do with United States or European Union or Russia or any other country. It's Media and Persia. And I would say that Darius, the first king, was a Mede, and Cyrus that succeeded him. Verse 21. The shaggy goats represents the kingdom of Greece. Kingdom of Greece. So once again, I think many people been blind by this false theology of dispensational premillennialism, where they like represents United States. If it represents, no, it's specifically Media and Persia and the kingdom of Greece. And the large horn that is between his eyes is the first king, Alexander the Great. This guy right there, Alexander the Great. I mean, there's so much information about him. I mean, there's so many movies about him was made. He lived. He was born on 3. By the way, think of this. It's about 500 BC before Christ, and he prophesied about 150 years ahead about Alexander the Great, who was born at 356 and died at 323. So the point is this, that he was that's him. That's the only person anybody can think of. Greek, the first king of Greece. Verse 22: the broken horn and the four horns that came up in its place represents the four kingdoms. Now it says, right after Alexander the Great died, the kingdom split up in four kingdoms: the Ptolemaic Kingdom of Egypt, the Seleucid Empire, the Attalid Dynasty of the Kingdom of Pergamon and Macedon. So you have those four kingdoms right there, or actually here they go by names of each king. So you have Kingdom of Cassander, Kingdom of Casimachus, Kingdom of Ptolemy, Kingdom of Seleucus. So interesting things that the kingdom, like if you look at the map, like Jerusalem is right there, and when it talks about Kingdom of the South, don't think of United States. I mean, from United States point of view, it's like Southern Kingdom is like Mexico, and like Northern Kingdom is Canada. No, think of the locations that he's talking about, and beautiful land referring to Jerusalem. So you have Southern Kingdom, which is Kingdom of Ptolemy, and Northern Kingdom, which seems like it's Kingdom of Seleucus. So continue on. So represents four kingdoms which will arise from his nation, although not with his power. So those kingdoms will not have the same power. Continue on. And in the later period of their dominion, so later on down the line, so it's no longer 350s or 320s, I should say, 320 something. In the later period of their dominion, when the wrongdoers have run their course, Antiochus IV Epiphanis, a king will arise, insolent and skilled in intrigue, and his power will be mighty, but not by his own power, and he will destroy to an extraordinary degree, and will be successful and do as he pleases. He will destroy mighty men and holy people, Jews, and through his shrewdness he will make deceit a success by his influence, and he will make himself great in his own mind, and he will destroy many while they are at ease. He will even oppose the Prince of Princes, but he will broken without human agency, and the vision of the evening and mornings which has been told is true. But as for you, kept the vision secret because it pertains to many days in the future. Think of this, it's still 500 BC, and many days in the future. Yes, it's almost when this he was living in Antiochus Epiphanis, and he lived actually about Antiochus Epiphanis 163 before Christ. So if you minus out of 500, that's about 340. Yeah, 340. About approximate 340 years between the events, between the prophecy and the fulfillment of this prophecy. Verse 27. Then I, Daniel, was exhausted and sick for days. Then I got up and carried on the king's business, but I was astonished at the vision, and there was no one to explain it. So interesting things that I found this video on YouTube, and I play some parts of it and let you think if um, what I'm saying is true and how I think it's interpreted, or bunch of dispensational premillennialists think still like European Union or United States or Russia, which might not be longer in existence in just couple of years. Maybe like China might take over. But let's play this video.
It is here that the Jewish people became subjects of the Greek world. When Alexander died, his massive Macedonian empire fractured into several monarchies, ruled by his
4 monarchies.
closest comrades and later their descendants. The
1, 2, 3, 4. Kingdom of Cassander, Kingdom of Lysimachus, Kingdom of Ptolemy, and Kingdom of Seleucus. This one kingdom into 4 kingdoms.
These so-called Diadochic kingdoms were constantly at war with one another, and the region of Judea, being situated in the borderland between the Ptolemies of Egypt and Seleucids of Syria, became a battleground where the two
Notice they fighting right where the Jerusalem, Israel, Judah is at. Ptolemy versus Seleucus.
Macedonian dynasties jockeyed for power and influence. Despite this, life remained fairly peaceful for the Hebrews. The Hellenistic kings generally used the same light touch the Persians had, interfering very little in the region's culture, religion, and internal politics. The Jewish people were ruled semi-autonomously by a high priest of the Judaic faith, who handled matters both religious and secular from.
But if you remember, if you read 1 Samuel, the Eli, he was a prophet, and only the king should be killing people, but he killed, I forgot the name of the kings they captured. But the point is this, they already start compromising, because high priest and the king are 2 different positions which should not be combined together.
The Great Temple of Jerusalem. In 198 BC, Antiochus III had finally expelled the Ptolemies out of Judea, putting the region firmly under the suzerainty of the Seleucid Empire. He lowered taxes and affirmed the Jewish people's freedom to live by their own faith and laws, and for now, Judea was content. Throughout world history, we often see subject peoples of a multi-ethnic empire willingly adopt the language and customs of said empire's rulers in an attempt to improve social mobility, so many Jewish peoples began to practice the Greek culture of their suzerains. This phenomenon, known as Hellenization, was perpetuated mainly by the upper strata.
Hellenization or Hellenization, which is Erasmus' mispronunciation, but Hellenization has to do like Ilios, or it's a Greek, or forgot how to say already, the Greece, but pretty much it's Hellenization, like, or think of Americanization throughout the world. It's Hellenization is pretty much spreading out the Greek culture throughout the world, and sometimes force people to be more like Greek.
Of Jewish society, namely the wealthy priests, merchants, and aristocrats in urban Jerusalem. The Hellenization process was expedited in 175 BC, when the cultural.
And just a reminder that the Daniel saw the prophecy between 561 to 538 BC. So if you just minus, let's just go by the let's just round it off to 540. From 540 you minus what's the calculator? So let's just say out of 540 minus 175 equals, that's 365 years between Daniel's vision and the fulfillment.
The traditionalist high priest, Onias III, was deposed by his Philhellene brother, Joshua, better known by his Greek name, Jason. Jason would go on to wield his power as high priest to begin transforming Jerusalem into a classically Greek city by building a gymnasium and an ephebium, essentially community centers for Greek education and learning. He also sent Jewish athletes to compete in a mimicry of the Olympic Games, hosted by the king in Tyre. There he offered a sacrificial tribute to the Greek demigod Hercules, to whom the games were dedicated. Perhaps his most radical policy was to allow non-Jews in Jerusalem to set idols of their gods within the Holy Temple itself. The fact that the high priest was openly tolerating and even promoting the polytheistic gods was deeply disturbing to many Jews who clung to their monotheist faith. This sentiment was especially strong in the poorer, rural communities of Judea, who had clung far closer to Orthodox Judaism.
So you have a bunch of false gods, let's see, Greek gods. So he had bunch of false gods, whatever, in Jewish temple.
A strange situation was made worse in 175 BC, when one Antiochus IV, Epiphanis, became the Seleucid Basileus. Various ancient accounts describe
Basileus means king.
Him as a proto-Nero or Commodus, that is to say, erratic. His sobriquet, Epiphanes, meant manifested from God, but among his people he was secretly known by a variation of the title, Epimanes, which meant madman. It was him who in the first year of his rule supported Jason's coup against Onias III, hoping a pro-Greek high priest would help Hellenize the Jews. However, only 3 years later, Antiochus decided that Jason wasn't Hellenizing Judea fast enough, so helped replace him with an even more pro-Hellenic priest, Menelaus. With that matter settled, Antiochus then marched with his armies into Egypt, aiming to double the size of his empire by seizing the Ptolemaic heartland. While the king was preoccupied, Jason seized his opportunity and returned to Jerusalem, initiating a counter-coup and expelling the deeply unpopular Menelaus. However, Antiochus's campaign was cut short when the Roman Republic intervened on behalf of the Ptolemies. Unable to match the strength of the legion, the king was forced to retreat to Syria. Already utterly humiliated by Rome, Antiochus's mood turned wrathful when he found out that his subjects in Jerusalem had rebelled. He stormed Jerusalem with his army, slaying the supporters of Jason and reinstating his puppet Menelaus as high priest. He then left Apollonius in charge of subduing the city, who accomplished his job by dismantling the walls of Jerusalem and building a fort named Acra on the nearby hill of Ophel, so everyone could gaze upwards and see the symbol of King Antiochus's power. Rather than leaving good enough alone, Antiochus began to actively exterminate Judaism, forbidding the people of Judea from observing the Sabbath, circumcising their sons, or performing other rituals. He had the Holy Temple in Jerusalem converted into a temple of Zeus.
Notice, so he converted the temple into temple of Zeus. I mean, I wonder why. Like, think of this in Gospel of John, chapter 2. So Jesus cleansing the temple, and then the Jews then said, "It took 46 years to build this temple, and yet you will raise it up in 3 days." So wonder which temple are they talking about? Are they talking about what's some temples that Ezra built, or actually Herod the Great built? But and if you gonna if we gonna let's see, Herod's temple. So Herod's temple. I want, like I said, to me seems to me, he's it's not only like uh, during this Antiochus the fourth, not only destruction, it's maybe it's I will not be surprised if either Antiochus or actually the Maccabee destroyed the temple, because let's continue listening.
Which he personally spilled the blood of a pig, a deeply sacrilegious ritual to the Judaic faith. The king declared that the Jewish people should begin worshipping the Greek gods. Hellenized Jews accepted these changes, but many others did not, resolving instead to fight. It is here that the Maccabees enter our story. Our story now shifts to the small Judean town of Mede, where a local priest, Mattathias, and his 5 sons lived. They belonged to the relatively minor Hasmonean family and were deeply Orthodox Jews who had remained true to every tenet of their religion, even as their countrymen became increasingly assimilated into Greek culture. Sometime in 167 BC, a Seleucid official arrived in Modin and compelled the townsfolk to offer a sacrifice to the Greek gods. Mattathias refused to make this offering, and another one of the townsfolk, a Hellenized Jew, stepped forth to do so in his place. Flying into a rage, Mattathias drew his knife and murdered his countryman before he could perform the ritual. The priest then cut down the Seleucid official as well, and destroyed the pagan altar for good measure.
I wonder if the only the was some the place where they were sacrificing was destroyed, and the whole temple was not destroyed. I wonder.
Knowing they would be branded outlaws, Mattathias and his 5 sons fled into the nearby hills, followed by many like-minded Orthodox Jews known as the Hasidim. From there, the fight had begun. While Mattathias died sometime in 166 BC from causes unknown, he would be succeeded by his 3rd son, Judah, a dynamic young commander who, through a mixture of ferocity, ruthlessness, and bravery, would come to be known as Maccabeus, a word deriving from the Aramaic Maccaba, the hammer.
So Judah became Maccabees, or Maccaba, the hammer.
At the early stages, the rebellion was not a struggle between Jews and Greeks, but a civil conflict between pro- and anti-Hellenic Jews. The Maccabees began their movement with a terror campaign, launching lightning raids upon predominantly Jewish towns. They killed many of their own countrymen who they considered too Greek, burning down their homes and destroying the pagan altars where they worshipped. Most notably, they rounded up the sons of Hellenized Jews and had them forcefully circumcised. The message was simple: Greek culture was to be purged from Judea. Before long, the Maccabees had earned the attention of the military governor Apollonius, who resolved to crush the rebels before they could sow any more chaos. In 167, after gathering a local army of around 2,000 men in Samaria, Apollonius marched south to the Gophna Hills, where it was said that the elusive Judah was hiding out. Here, the Maccabees proved they were capable of more than just murdering civilians and burning altars. Knowing they were outnumbered,
and I wonder, was it only the altar was burnt? Because why would Herod's temple be rebuilt? The entire was complete in approximate only to be destroyed. So interesting. So I wonder which temple. So how many temples are there? So we have, like I said, one by Solomon, the first temple, the second temple by uh, Ezra and Ezra and Nehemiah, and the third temple by Herod. So I wonder, um, did they destroy just the altars in a temple, which were actually used to be a Zeus temple, or did Maccabees destroy the whole temple? And in regards to the book of Maccabees, I don't believe it's inspired book, but it's a good historical book to read to find out. So if you have a chance, check it out, or you can um, Maccabi Bible. There we go. You can actually listen to it in audio and just think for yourself. Um, so yeah, but like I said, I don't believe it's inspired book. Lots of things in it is I can see that the Jews, um, I call it some Jews compromise it. Give example, like one time I was like listening, I was like, wait, the Jews said that the Spartans and Jews are of the same seed of Abraham. I was just like, are you guys crazy? You guys gonna compromise like that? That's crazy. But the point is this, that it can be a good historical source to see if what I'm saying actually was fulfilled, or you can go to the historical resources to find out more about. But that was a chapter 8 and of book of Daniel, and that's it.